And good afternoon, folks. Chief Meteorologist Nick Lilia here. Take a look at the tropical update for October 6th of 2020, brought to you by the folks at Pine Belt Gutters and Remodeling. A lot going on, so let's start things off by a peek into the tropics and put all the cards on the table. Of course, we've got Delta here, what's left over of Gamma there. We've got a little ridge of high pressure that's nosing its way into the Gulf, kind of like that, right there. We've got another trough digging in from the north, and we've got a little frontal boundary kind of right in there. You just want to lay all the cards on the table. These are the things that we're watching over the next couple of days. The question becomes, with the ridge that's over here, again, ridges, the air moves around ridges like so, is how much of a push we're going to give to Delta here to get it across the Yucatan and into the Gulf of Mexico. The stronger this ridge is, or the more elongated it is off east-west, the further off to the west that Delta is going to go before it wraps back around the north side. So you can end up with something like that. That's going to be the question over the next few days. And the latest from the National Hurricane Center continues to shift things off to the west. Now a Category 4 storm, wind at 145 miles an hour, gusting to 175, pressure down to 956, moving to the west-northwest at 17 miles an hour. So this thing has not only picked up strength, it's picked up speed. Yesterday at this time it was moving between 10 and 13 miles an hour, now all the way up to 17. Thought is it'll be a Category 3 as it gets across the Yucatan and into the Gulf of Mexico. It's going to re-energize. We'll be back at a Category 4 again. Sneaking in a little bit closer to home, South Mississippi, Louisiana, even Lake Charles, which just took it on the nose from Laura in the cone with this one. New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Alexandria, all the way up to Jackson, everybody in the region in the cone. Earlier this morning, I was posting about how the most likely landfall, given some of the data from earlier today, looked like here. I would now argue the most likely landfall looks somewhere in here. It's shifted back off to the west as well. The National Hurricane Center, by the way, let me zoom back out, has a flight out here, and what they're doing is they're flying around the Gulf of Mexico, getting the upper air patterns, and that will allow us to know in better detail what the ridge of high pressure is looking like out there, and thus this track will become a little more clearer as we get that data in. Now that data gets into the models for the later this evening run, the 0Z stuff, so the stuff that comes out starting at about 9 o'clock all the way through about 2 o'clock in the morning. So late tonight is when we're going to get some of that data, and likely when this forecast track either will perhaps change drastically, change subtly, or not change at all. I know what that sounds like. It sounds like, you know, waving the old something. But you guys get the idea. I have a sneaking suspicion now with how much this ridge is shoving its way off and to the west here. There we go. Shoving its way off to the west. I wouldn't be surprised if this makes more of a trek over the Yucatan and a wider turn and then turns back to the northeast like that. If we end up with more of a kind of a crinkle, maybe not as exaggerated as shown here, but more of a crinkle instead of a kind of a wider turn. That would mean that it would be a little bit weaker. It also means that it would travel over some of the warmer waters that are out here for a little bit longer before it made landfall, as opposed to going over some of the cooler waters in the Gulf of Mexico, which are basically due north of what is right now. So what's the percent chance you're dealing with a tropical storm force wind across parts of the Gulf Coast? Well, you can see here in the South Mississippi, the Pine Belt, a 30 to 40 to 50% chance. That hasn't changed much over the last 24 hours. The bullseye of where the strongest wind may be at landfall has shifted back off to the west, of course, in response to the forecast track itself shifting. And you can see that the percent chance of dealing with a hurricane force wind has come down a little bit here in the Pine Belt. But generally speaking, regionally, has actually increased across parts of Louisiana. Still dealing with some chances for rapid intensification as we head through the next 36 to 48 hours. Generally speaking, when we see 27% on there, you say, oh, that's pretty low compared to the other numbers, but usually that's a reasonably high number when it comes to rapid intensification. So it's one of the it's an anchor bias problem that we're dealing with. We say, oh, it's in the 48 hours, it's really not going to have a chance to rapidly intensify, but actually it will. because that's usually a reasonably high number. So there's a chance that this continues to intensify. Notice that the spaghetti models on here, now the ones that actually start where this thing actually is, take it across the tip of the Yucatan instead of pushing it a little further off and to the west. But all of them drop this thing in kind of the central to western sections of the Gulf of Mexico before turning that thing back around. Now, it doesn't double back on itself quite as much, but it does end up making landfall somewhere along the Louisiana coast, given the latest data, by Friday afternoon and evening and into the overnight hours. And then, and you can see a couple of these lines in here are starting to turn a little sharper. They're kind of underneath here, but they're in there. Starting to turn a little bit sharper, so that's one thing we'll have to keep tabs on through the next few days. I wanted to show the GFS here because you can see how far off to the west it gets before it turns all the way back around on itself and ends up across parts of North Mississippi by the time we get towards Saturday. That is an indication that the 18Z here is seeing something a little more like that, as opposed to the subtle track that it is like that right now. So again, we're going to have to wait and see. I think once we get that 0Z data in, we'll know a lot more. But the forecast for South Mississippi, and I really want to press this here, has not changed. Heavy rain at times, up to an inch of rain, with wind gusts to 35 miles an hour, I think is our baseline with this across the entire Pine Belt, short of maybe George County. But pretty much everywhere it has a chance for that. Many places are going to see heavy rain at times, up to 3 inches of rain possible. Wind gusts up to 45 miles an hour. Some places, rounds of heavy rain up to 5 inches. This is going to be mainly off to the west, with wind gusts at 55 in a few spots. Again, Walthall, Lawrence, Simpson County mainly. Heavy rounds of rain up to 7 inches of rain, wind gusts to 60 miles an hour, and we can't rule out the possibility of tropical tornadoes. Again, that's going to be a few spots. And some of those few spots may be in Wayne County, depending on how things shake out, but the higher percent chance is going to be closer to the center of this thing. Which at this time, the higher likelihood seems to be across some of our western counties here in South Mississippi. So there's a look at your tropical update for October. It just feels like August because of the way this hurricane season just went. October 6th of 2020, brought to you by the folks at Pine Belt Gutters and Remodeling.